Hi, this is Remembering the Past, the show where we talk about people who've died recently who've had a profound effect on our history, our society, or our culture. And tonight we're going to start out with two people who had a profound effect on medicine and in my field in intensive care specifically. We're going to start with our feature, Dr. James Jude, who died recently at the age of 87. And Dr. Jude was the pioneer and the father of cardiopulmonary resuscitation, or CPR. All those movies you see on television where people are doing CPR and pumping on people's chests. It was Dr. Jude who started that all in his laboratory at Johns Hopkins in the late 1950s. We've talked about Johns Hopkins and its influence on American medicine before, and Dr. Jude and his colleagues really were the people who invented CPR, as it were. He then moved to the University of Miami, and here's a report from the University of Miami on Dr. James Jude.
In 1956, Dr. James Jude was a cardiac surgery resident at Johns Hopkins, deep into his research of hypothermia, a field of study he'd started at the University of Minnesota. But fate led him east. That, and the fact his lovely bride was from Baltimore. Little did he know his work in hypothermia would change the way the world responds to emergencies.
I was working on hypothermia, whether you should warm them fast or slow, and I was working on rats. Then when I went to Johns Hopkins for my internship and my training program, I continued with this. And I got to know Guy Knickerbocker, who was a young man in training and working on his PhD with Dr. Cowenhoven in his laboratory.
William Cowenhoven was an acclaimed electrical engineer at Hopkins. With the help of his graduate student, Guy Knickerbocker, they were developing an external defibrillator.
And Guy Knickerbocker used to come to my laboratory from his laboratory and defibrillate the animals so we can continue our studies. And one of these times he told me that he had noticed that when he put the paddles on the dog's chest, that the blood pressure went up. I saw the value of this.
Dr. Jude made the connection no one else had, that it was the pressure of the paddles that was making the difference. Even when no electricity was applied, it was determined forceful rhythmic pressure on the chest could cause enough blood to move through the body to sustain the vital organs.
I found that we could extend this to 60 minutes and still get a survival by using external cardiac massage on the dog. That is, squeezing the heart between the breastplate and the vertebral column.
Prior to this discovery, the options for prolonging life outside of a hospital setting were practically non-existent.
If somebody died then, I had to open the chest, go in there and massage. And in 1960, CPR, as you know it and I know, started. He came up with the concept of he wanted an external defibrillator so that we could defibrillate, which he did. When Guy Knickerbocker told him that he did this to the dog and he saw a pulse, that's all Guy Knickerbocker knew, if he saw a pulse. And Dr. Jude said, why did he see the pulse?
In 1960, the results were published in the Journal of the American Medical Association. They wrote, anyone, anywhere, can now initiate cardiac resuscitative procedures. All that is needed is 2 hands. There was another revelation Dr. Jude had while at Johns Hopkins, a love for teaching, and this would bring him to the University of Miami.
Jim Jude was chief of thoracic surgery here. He taught many people here. Great surgeon and a great physician.
I enjoyed teaching, and I taught from 64, which is the year I came down here, till 1971, when I went out in private practice. Then I retired in the year 2000.
During those 3 decades in Miami, Dr. Jude saved countless lives and taught thousands of others how to do so as well.
So we taught the fire department also, and they in turn developed the rescue squads, which at that time were a small part of the fire department, became the major part of the fire department.
I met Dr. Jude here at Mercy Hospital many years ago, and then I had the privilege to be his associate for 14 years. The division of cardiac surgery at Mercy Hospital was structured by him, and actually he was one of the initiators of the ICUs. We didn't have any ICUs in the hospital before his pioneer work. He traveled all over the world spreading the news of the need for intensive care units. Dr. Jude, technically one of the best surgeons I've ever known, was a surgeon's surgeon. But more than that, his personality, he was a very humble man. He's a very humble man.
He may be humble, but he's the father of CPR, and he started CPR as the world knows it today.
It's CPR. You know, the fact that we now have a technique whereby a lot of people can be saved. We've been able to help people.
We're going to move on from Dr. Jude to another doctor who was crucial to the development of critical care medicine and intensive care units, and also to medicine in general, and that's Dr. Forrest Bird, who died recently at the age of 94. He was an aviator and an inventor, and he developed one of the first positive pressure ventilators. These machines essentially breathed for people. Through positive pressure, the machines forced air into their lungs, providing them with oxygen and removing carbon dioxide. And they replaced the iron lungs of the 1950s, which were prevalent in the polio epidemic. Dr. Bird's ventilator was pretty much the prototype for today's ventilators that you see in intensive care units everywhere, and he developed it through his experience in aviation medicine, and here he tells the story.
Well, I'm Forrest Bird. I'm 85 years old, and I was born and raised in a town called Stoughton, Massachusetts. My daddy was a World War I pilot. Got his own airplane he bought in 1928. In any event, he soloed me on my 14th birthday, June 9, 1935. Of course, a young lad, all I wanted to do was fly. But after I got flying a little bit, I decided, well, I should know more about the airplanes. I wanted to build airplanes and so on. And then, of course, World War II came along. At that time, what we had for oxygen was we had a free flow, and we used to call them horse bags. As you know, today in the airlines, you'll see them put this in the bag on the bottom. I started to play with this coming across the North Atlantic. The only problem was it was a demand regulator. You had to suck your guts out to get it to release oxygen to you. And I said, you know, as an engineer, I can do better than this. Doc Halsey was my flight surgeon, and he talked about pressure breathing. In other words, forcing the oxygen into the lung. And he said, well, what you want to do is have it force the oxygen into the lungs. So what happened was, at 28,000 feet, we couldn't fly over that because we just couldn't get enough oxygen, and we become hypoxic like getting drunk. But yet our airplanes, we were coming out with the Minneapolis Honeywell turbo, the GE turbines, and you had a 40,000 foot elevation with your airplanes. They'd go on upstairs, but you couldn't go up, physiological. And you know, when they're shooting stuff up at your fanny, the higher you are, obviously the better off you were. What I did was I had an aneroid, in other words, just a sealed chamber in there, and at 25,000 feet it would start to swell up, and it started a free flow of oxygen. It was easy to breathe in, you had to push out against it, in other words, pressure breathing. It seemed to work pretty good. So we got to 30,000 feet back, we were really excited. We had something, we really did. And I could never consider myself an inventor or anything else at that time. So consequently, what Dr. Halsey suggested was, he said, Colonel Armstrong, he was the head of aviation medicine. He was the old man, he was 42 years old at the time, and he was at Randolph Field in San Antonio, Texas. And I brought a prototype in, and I told him what I was doing. First of all, he questioned a little bit. He looked it all over and so on, and he said, well, talk to my fellows. He brought several fellows in, tell them what you were doing. In the meantime, he got an oxygen cylinder out, and he was hooking it up. And as we were going, he started breathing it. He says, well, this is nothing but a demand regulator. My heart went down like this. But he says, a damn good one. So they had taken that, and totally, they just took, mine was crude, but it worked. But they had really made a beautiful production-type unit out of it. And they brought Bendix and Aero in, two different manufacturers. And within 6 months, that was in production. And that allowed our pilots to get up to 40,000 feet, which was quite a breakthrough at the time.
We're going to move out of medicine and move on to Detroit, where Mel Farr died at the age of 70. He was the second great Detroit Lion of the 60s and 70s to die recently. He was a teammate of Charlie Sanders, whose podcast we did a couple of weeks back. Mel Farr was a great running back at UCLA and was also a great running back for the Detroit Lions. And then for a while was one of the most successful African-American car dealers in the country. Here's Detroit Television to say a little bit about Mel Farr.
Breaking news from Detroit, where former Lions running back Mel Farr has died.
The former Detroit Lions running back was a face of the franchise in the late 60s and early 70s who rushed over 3,000 yards in 7 NFL seasons. A two-time Pro Bowler, Mel Farr stayed involved with the Lions and their alumni programs up until last season. He also made quite a name for himself in his second career as a car dealership owner and was known for the slogan, Mel Farr Superstar.
Well, Mel Farr may have been an All-American at UCLA and an All-Pro for the Lions, but throughout eastern Michigan and southern Ontario. He's most famous for these car commercials.
The continuing adventures of Mel Farr, superstar, fighting high prices to bring you a far better deal.
Yes, I'm fighting high prices on used cars with my low monthly payment plan. Take a look at my used car special of the week. This beautiful 1980 Mustang for only $119 a month. We've got a lot full of these bargains. The other dealers can't sell you an 80 Mustang for $119 a month, and they can't fly either.
Greenfield and 10 Mile.
Another thing I got to mention about Mel Farr is he's a good friend of Marvin Gaye, and there's a saying that all athletes want to be singers and all singers want to be athletes. He got Marvin Gaye a tryout with the Lions. Marvin didn't make it, but he put Mel Farr and his teammate Lem Barney into one of his iconic records from 1971, What's Going On. You'll hear them at the beginning.
Hey, what's up now? Brother, what's up? Hey, how you doing? Party, man. Yeah, brother, I can dig it. Stop right on. Hey, man, what's your name?
Mother, there's too many of you crying. Oh, what's going on? What's going on? What's going on? Yeah, what's going on?
Well, we're going to close tonight in Great Britain with Priscilla Maria Veronica White, who died recently at the age of 72. That was her birth name, but she was known by her stage name, Cilla Black, and she was arguably the biggest female pop star in Britain of the last 50 years, which is saying a lot considering people like Petula Clark and Dusty Springfield. Ironically, she was barely known in the United States, but she went from being a big rock and roll star in the mid-60s to one of the most popular television personalities in Great Britain. In fact, most of her British obits were about her television career. One of the reasons for her popularity was her close association with the Beatles. She was a fellow Liverpudlian, a Scouse. She was a hat check girl at the Cavern Club when the Beatles were making their way up in the early 60s. They heard her singing and they introduced her to Brian Epstein, who became her manager at the same time he was the Beatles manager. Paul McCartney and John Lennon took a liking to her and they put her on the same bills that the Beatles were on in England at the time. They introduced her to George Martin, and then in 1964 she had the biggest hit of the 1960s for a female artist, bigger than anything Petula Clark did. It was a Burt Bacharach song, my favorite Burt Bacharach song. I thought she oversang it a little, and it didn't endear her to Dionne Warwick, but again, it was a huge hit in Great Britain.
Knowing I love you so.
Her follow-up in 1965 was another huge hit in Britain, barely known in the United States.
Record of the year so far, we think, has been Cilla Black's Anyone Who Had a Heart. And here, we've all been wondering whether she could follow it up with anything quite so good. She's got a new record out this week, and she's going to do it now for us. It's called You're My World.
You're my world, you're every move I make. Other eyes see the stars up in the sky, but for me they shine within your eyes.
Well, Burt Bacharach loved her, and he let her sing this for the British release of Alfie. Again, didn't endear her to Dionne Warwick.
What's it all about, Alfie? Is it just for the moment we live?
What's it all about when you start it out, Alfie?
Are we meant to take more than we give, or are we meant to be kind?
Well, I'm going to close on that note. I want to thank my producer and IT genius, Sid Tepps. And as I said, Cilla Black became a big television star in England, and she used this theme for her television shows, written by Paul McCartney, and that's him on the guitar.
Step inside, love. Let me find you a place where the cares of the day will be carried away by the smile on your face. We are together now and forever. Come my way. Step inside, love. and stay. Step inside love.